As you all know, Punjab K. Shayer was a very witty judge who could regale the court with laughter. அவருடைய விட்டு மாதிரி யாருமே அடிக்க முடியாது. அந்த மாதிரி ஒரு விட்டு அடிப்பார் அது. And he was an ICS. That is, he graduated from Oxford and he joined the Indian Civil Service. He was born on 1899 in Chennai. And he did his graduation from Oxford, from the Inner Temple. And in 1922, he became a ICS, a Indian Civil Service. And the காலத்து foreign service மாதிரி Indian Civil Serviceல he was recruited as an ICS and he was appointed as a district judge in 1932. In 1932, he was a district judge of various districts, and one of them was in Anantapur. Anantapur is now a part of Andhra, but it became a part of Andhra later. But now it was in Tamil Nadu earlier. Sorry. And in 1932, he became a district judge. And in one of the cases, one of the cases is the adulteration case. The adulteration case, you had two brilliant advocates who was arguing. One was Nugent Grant, one was P.S. Shivasamy Iyer, in whose name the P.S. Shivasamy Iyer school is now conducted. அந்த ஒரு கேஸ்ல ஒரு காஃபில சிக்கரி கலந்து விற்கிறாங்க. So Nugent Grant said that because the chicory is added to the coffee flavor நல்லா இருக்கு, and because of that flavor it is being sold, so there is no question of adulteration of the coffee அப்படின்னு அவர் ஆர்கியூ பண்றாரு. அப்போ Shivasamy Iyer he was also arguing for the coffee manufacturer who was producing the coffee powder. அப்போ you see the wit of the judge. அதுக்கு சொல்றாரு அவரு, Mr. Nugent Grant, you must understand, in adulteration and in adultery, you cannot argue that the substitute is better than the original அப்படின்னு சொல்றாரு. என்ன ஒரு பிரில்லியன்ட் விட் அது. ஸோ அந்த ஒரு ப்ராposition of law in both adultery, that is in marriage cases, and in adulteration, that is in various consumer products, you cannot say the substitute you are adding to that original is better than the original itself. அந்த ஒரு வாரத்தை நீங்க பண்ணவே முடியாதுன்னு சொல்லி he decreed the case of the plaintiff, and he said that adding chicory to the coffee will know, though it enhances the flavor, it cannot be said it is not adulterated. He decrees the suit in favor of the other person. In 1948, he was elevated as an additional judge of the Madras High Court, and in 1950 he became the permanent judge of the Madras High Court, and I think he retired in 1957 or 58. I'm not very sure. The retirement date 1957 he retired. அந்த ஒரு 8-9 வருஷத்துல umpteen number of cases were argued before him. அதுல 2 கேஸ் stands out. ஒன்னு ஆலவந்தார் murder case, in which my boss, Mr. S. Govind Swaminathan, was the prosecutor and B.T. Sundararajan was the appearing for the accused. The ரெண்டாவது copyright case, where a case was filed by one Mr. Sampath Iyengar, an expert in income tax, against Nani Palkiwala and Kanga, who are also experts in income tax law, saying that அவருடைய புக்ல சிலதெல்லாம் காப்பி அடிச்சு நானி பால்கிவாலா போட்டிருக்காரு அப்படின்னு சொல்லி he files a suit. காப்பிரைட்ல போட்டு he claims damages also for the infringement. அது just another case which I am going to explain to you how he dealt with that case அப்படிங்கிறதையும் நான் சொல்ல போறேன். Both the cases are very significant because both were landmark cases during his period, and several doyens of the bar appeared for Sampath Iyengar, and for Nani Palkiwala, M.C. Settilwad, who was then the Attorney General of India, appeared, and he argued the case for Nani Palkiwala. So this is the brief background of Lord Chief Justice Punjab Kesari. Punjab Kesariuடைய பசங்களும் became the foreign secretary during Rajiv Gandhi's tenure as a prime minister, and brilliant, absolutely brilliant man. No doubt about that. But apart from his judicial career, he also wrote several books. For example, he wrote a book on Krishna, Lord Krishna, saying that Lord Krishna's book, The Darling of Humanity, ஒரு புக்கு. அதுல வந்து ஒரு அனெக்டோட் நான் அப்புறம் கடைசியில சொல்றேன் அதை பத்தி. அதுல ஒரு அலெக்சாண்டர் வந்து ஒருத்தர் கேட்பாரு, வாட் மேக்ஸ் அ மேன் அ காட் அப்படின்னு கேட்பாரு. அதுக்கு ஒருத்தர் பதில் சொல்லுவார். அது நான் சொல்றேன், I'll tell you that in the end. The second is his own autobiography, 25 years a civilian, அது ஒரு autobiography. Then another autobiography, an Indian in Western Europe. An excellently traced life career of Punjab Kesari. அப்போ அந்த புக்ஸ் அதை தவிர சில புக்ஸ் எல்லாம் எழுதியிருக்காரு அவரு. தட் இஸ் லைக் ஹிதோபதேசா எழுதியிருக்காரு, கோவலன் கண்ணகி எழுதியிருக்காரு, தென்னாலிராமனை பத்தி எழுதியிருக்காரு. And he was also a member of various societies like the Archaeological Society of South India. He was the president. Then he was also in the Royal Society of Literature. He was a president of the Royal Society of Literature. And after he retired as a judge, he was a director of legal studies. And when he was a director of legal studies, several enactments were made. He was a staunch follower of Hinduism, and he followed the Hindu code. So அந்த மாதிரி வந்து ஒரு பேக்ரவுண்ட் இருக்கக்கூடிய ஒரு மனிதர். ஆலவந்தான் murder case is a very popular case where one ஆலவந்தான், more than the case, it is the gruesome nature in which he was murdered and how the trial went on, what were the various versions of the witnesses, and how did the police draft the charge sheet. This is the background of the case. There were two versions of the murder and how the correct version was brought before the court by the then Inspector of Police Ramanatha Iyer of Rayapuram. ராயபுரத்தில் நடந்த ஒரு மர்டர் அது, நார்த் மெட்ராஸ், and how it was solved. So this is the brief background about Justice Punjab Kesari. And அவருடைய பயோகிராஃபி, அவரால் எழுதும்போது 25 years a civilian அப்படின்னு அந்த பயோகிராஃபில லார்ட் சீஃப் ஜஸ்டிஸ் வி.ஆர். கிருஷ்ணய்யர் வந்து ஒரு ஃபார்வர்ட் எழுதியிருக்காரு. அவரை பத்தி ஒன்று எழுதியிருக்காரு. I'll probably read out to you. And the கிருஷ்ணய்யருடைய respect for Punjab Kesari, I can just in a few sentences I will tell you. அவரை பத்தி சொல்லும்போது அவர் என்ன எழுதியிருக்காருன்னா, he said ASP Iyer's bench was hilarious, vivacious, spontaneously barbed, but eruditely human. இந்த கோர்ட்ல வந்து அவர் கேஸ் நடத்துறாருன்னா, people used to throng the court. It was always crowded because அவருடைய விட்டு, அவருடைய சென்ஸ் ஆஃப் இன்டர்பிரிட்டேஷன் ஆஃப் லா, இதெல்லாம் வந்து ஹைலி எருடைட் ஸ்காலர். அதனால அவரை பத்தி வந்து கிருஷ்ணய்யர் இந்த மாதிரி சொல்றதுல வந்து ஒரு ஆச்சரியமே கிடையாது. And those who thronged this court were enriched by the knowledge and the judgments of the learned judge. Then he says, ASPI ஒரு தடவை என்ன ஆச்சுன்னா, staunch believer of Hindu faith. அப்போ சிலோன்லேன்னு ஒருத்தன் வந்து ஒரு he wrote a book on ராமாயணா. அதுல வந்து ராமரை பத்தி scathing remarks he makes in the book. And then he sends it to Punjab Kesari to know his comments. அவருடைய வியூஸ பத்தி பஞ்சாப் கேசரிக்கு அந்த புத்தகம் அனுப்புறான். சரியா? அதுக்கு அவர் என்ன எழுதுறாருன்னா, ராமரை பத்தி இவ்வளவு ஸ்கேத்திங்கா எழுதிருக்கீங்க. அதுக்கு அவர் எழுதுறாரு, 10 தலை 20 கை கொண்ட ராமரை பத்தி ஒண்ணுமே சொல்லல. And he had no scathing remarks to make. After all, நீங்க ஒரு மனிதர், ஒரு தலை 2 கை வச்சுருக்கீங்க, நீங்க என்ன பண்ணிட்டு போறீங்க ராமருக்கு அப்படின்னு சொல்லி அந்த புக்கை திருப்பி ரிட்டர்ன் பண்றாரு அவர். So these are the anecdotes which makes A.S. Punjab Kesari a very interesting person and interesting personality also. Similarly, என்ன பண்ணாரு 1945 Lakshmikanthan murder case when he was a district judge. Lakshmikanthan murder case was being conducted in the High Court. அப்போ வந்து as a district judge, he made certain comments criticizing the judgment of the Lakshmikanthan and the Tyagaraja Bhagodariam, N.S. Krishnan and his accomplices were convicted of the murder of Lakshmikanthan. And அதை criticize பண்ணி அவர் எழுதும்போது there was a lot of uproar in the press also that how a district judge can criticize the judgment of the High Court அப்படின்னு சொல்லி ஒரு ஆர்டிகிளே வந்தது. But then they didn't take much notice of that because in 1947 both the accused were acquitted by the High Court based on the direction given by the Privy Council. So these are the various aspects of ASP Iyer. இன்னொரு கேரக்டரிஸ்டிக்ஸ் ஆஃப் ASP Iyer எப்படின்னா he walks very fast. ரொம்ப ஃபாஸ்டா நடப்பாரு அவரு. ஸோ அவர் நடக்கும்போது இந்த மேஸ் பேரர்ஸ், இந்த கோல் ஓங்கி எடுத்துட்டு போவாங்க இல்லையா அந்த மேஸ் பேரர்ஸ், அவங்கள துரத்துற மாதிரி ஓடிட்டு இருப்பாரு அவரு. அவ்வளவு ஃபாஸ்டா நடப்பாரு அவரு. ஸோ அதனால there was a cartoon by V.C. Gopal Ratnam, other Doyen of the bar. அந்த கார்ட்டூன்ல வந்து இந்த ASP Iyer நடக்கிறத வந்து அந்த மேஸ் ரன்னர்ஸ் துரத்துற மாதிரியே நடப்பாரு அவரு. அவ்வளவு ஃபாஸ்டா நடப்பாரு அவரு. So that was one of the hilarious sides of ASP Iyer. Having this background, we will now come to the two cases of ASP Iyer, which is very, very popular. First is I am going to make on the copyright case. It is called the smell of piracy from Madras அப்படிங்கிற ஒரு தலைப்புல ஒரு கேஸ் வந்து நடக்கிறது. அந்த கேஸ் தான் வந்து where the copyright of the infringement of copyright of the book written by Nani Palkiwala was challenged by one Sampath Iyengar. இந்த கேஸ்ல வந்து ரெண்டு பேர் இந்த நானி பால்கிவாலா கோர்ட் ரூம் ஜீனியஸ் அப்படிங்கிற ஒரு புக்ல இந்த கேஸை பத்தி டிஸ்கஸ் பண்ணியிருக்காரு. அவரே பண்ணியிருக்காரு. அரவிந்த் தத்தார் அண்ட் சோலி சோராப்ஜி, அவங்க ரெண்டு பேரும் இந்த நானி பால்கிவாலா பத்தி எழுதும்போது இந்த கேஸ் ASP Iyer எப்படி அதை டிசைட் பண்ணாருங்கிறதையும் எலாபரேட். Both Sampath Iyengar and Nani Palkiwala were experts in income tax matters. And they have written several books and they have appeared before the tribunal in several cases also. இதுல என்ன ஆச்சுன்னா the first edition of the income tax commentary, it's called the Law and Practice of Income Tax, was released by Kanga and Palkiwala. அவங்களுடைய first edition வந்து they released in 1951. அப்போ என்ன ஆச்சுன்னா when it was released and it was circulated, A.C. Sampath Iyengar is an advocate from the Madras High Court. He has already published a commentary of the Income Tax Act of 1922. அவர் என்ன பண்ணாரு, he filed a suit saying that several portions of his book and are being pirated and asked his solicitors to serve a legal notice to Nani Palkiwala and Kanga. So Kanga at that time was in England. And so a detailed reply was sent in September denying the charges of infringement and refuting the claim for compensation. So இதுதான் வந்து the initial portion of the case, how it started. Then the suit was filed by A.C. Sampath Iyengar in CS number 350 of 1951. And Mr. Panjabakes Iyer, Justice Panjabakes Iyer was on the original side of the High Court and he heard that case. அப்போ வந்து அவர் என்ன சொல்றாருன்னா, most of the passages in Nani Palkiwala's book were copied from his book and he read out several passages which found a place in Nani Palkiwala's book. Now two questions arose before the court. Firstly, whether the defendants have infringed the plaintiff's copyright. Secondly, whether the similarities in any resulted from the use and employment of common sources and of expressions and ideas similar in income tax laws. So two cases. One, whether the defendants are infringed. Secondly, whether the similarities, if any, between the two books resulted from the use and employment of common verses, whether both these verses were extracted from any other book அப்படின்னு சொல்லி ஒரு கேள்வி வந்தது. Or was it their original thinking? The court analyzed every portion of the book and both the parties were examined accordingly. It went for trial. இந்த சமயத்துல வந்து the Indian Copyright Act of 1914 on which the case was filed was based on the British law, and the court took into account the Halsbury's laws of infringement to determine the nature of infringement. So several case laws were argued. Several case laws were filed before the court. First one, the G.A. Gramp and Sons versus Frank Smithson Limited, one of the primary cases regarding copyright, where the House of Lords observed that copying commonplace tables from pocket diaries would not amount to an infringement of copyright where no special labor or skill has been used. So unless there is a special labor or skill was used or exercised, merely copying from various books will not infringe copyright. அப்படிங்கிற ஒரு proposition was laid down by the House of Lords. And similarly, on that basis, Palkiwala was cross-examined by the court. அப்பெல்லாம் இதெல்லாம் கோர்ட்லயே கிராஸ் எக்ஸாமினேஷன் தான் நடக்கும். It doesn't go to the master's court for examination of the witnesses. The cross-examination of PW1 AC Iyengar and DW1 Nani Palkiwala was detailed, and ASP Iyengar சில கேள்விகள்லாம் the questions by the court அப்படிங்கிற மாதிரி அப்ப அந்த it's a practice even today. The court can ask questions even under the Evidence Act. It is there. அப்போ அவரை வந்து கேட்கும் பொழுது Nani Palkiwala's answers were more precise than Iyengar's answers. Iyengar's answers was more emotional. Nani Palkiwala's answers were more precise, to the point, on the question of law. And Sampath Iyengar could not stand the cross-examination of Kanga and Setilwan. Both were experts, doyens of the bar. And அவருடைய cross-examination வரும்போது he was fluttering. He was not able to answer the questions. During the course of proceedings, Nani Palkiwala relied on a proposition from Kartar Singh versus Lada Singh. The very famous case law, Kartar Singh versus Lada Singh. அதுல என்ன சொல்றாங்கன்னா, I will just read out the judgment. If any part of a work complained is a transcript of another work, or with colorable additions and variations prepared without any real independent literary labor, such portion of the work is piratical. It is impossible to establish a charge of piracy when it is necessary to track some passages and lines through hundreds of pages, or where the authors of a work challenged as piratical honesty applied their labor to various sources of information. So merely repeating or copying is piratical, whilst using your own analysis is not piratical. இதுல இந்த மாதிரி ஒரு சிச்சுவேஷன்ல how did ASP Iyer find out whether there was an infringement of copyright? அப்படிங்கிறது அவர் என்ன பண்ணாரு, he took both the books. Okay, அந்த ரெண்டு புக்லயுமே என்ன பண்றாரு, என்னென்ன பேசேஜஸ் இதுல வருது, இதோட சேம் பேசேஜஸ் பால்கிவாலா புக்லயும் வருதா அப்படிங்கறத பாக்குறாரு. Then he made an analysis. எந்தெந்த passages were common to both the books, எந்தெந்த passages were taken which are not common to both the books அப்படிங்கறத ஒரு பியூட்டிஃபுல் அனாலிசிஸ் பண்ணி then he comes to the court. அப்போ வந்து when he concluded, அவரோட ஜட்மெண்ட் என்ன சொல்றாருன்னா, Justice Iyer, while concluding the order, observed, Indians as a race are very fond of idolizing things. One well-known Indian statesman read a book 3 times, underlining one third of the book each time, and at the end found the whole book underlined. Indians have a great fascination for zeros and nils, and even called God Puja, the supreme zero. While rejecting the contentions raised by Iyengar, Justice Iyer held the remaining italics might have been done by the second defendant by accident, or might have been done by an unconscious impulse generated by his unconscious memory. By having read Exhibit P1 or any other commentary containing the same italicized words during his practice, but we will be simply involving ourselves in the realm of conjecture if we go further. Then he says, after hearing both the parties at length, and ultimately held that there is no scope of piracy, and Nani Kanga had only used their labor and skill to retrace the concerned paragraphs from the original judgments and reports which the plaintiff contended were pirated. The court held there is no proof that any portion of the plaintiff's book has been really copied or pirated by the defendants. Coming back to the question which were proposed before the court, it finally observed that no portion except 2.5 pages might have been restructured by Nani during the period when he was referring to various commentaries. It was observed by the court. It was observed by the court. Uh, and, it was also observed by the court that sorry, I am not satisfied that the plaintiff was moved by a desire for self in issuing the notice. And of course, he has lost some money by launching this ill advised litigation in which he has not succeeded. The plaintiff was the plaintiff was sincere in believing that a portion of this book had pirated. True, of course, he was quite wrong in his thinking, and so he has indulged in some untenable and extreme statements. ஏஎஸ்பிஆர் சொல்றாரு, "அப்ப நீயே வந்து மத்தவனை பார்த்து அடிச்சிருக்க உன்னுடைய புக்ல, அதை பார்த்து நானி பால்கேவாலா ஒரு 2 பேஜுக்கு அவர் எழுதியிருக்காரு. So copyright infringement எப்போ வரும்? Only when your own skill and labor, out of which you have made some propositions, has been copied by another, infringement வரலாம். நீ அடிக்கும்போது உனக்கு மேல அந்த யாருக்கிட்ட நீ காப்பி அடிச்சியோ அவன் உன் மேல கேச போட்டிருக்கணும். அவன் போடாது இருக்கிறதே உன்னுடைய பாக்கியம்தான். அவன் உன் மேல கேச போட்டிருக்கணும். ஏன்னா அவன் எழுதினதை வச்சு நீ எழுதியிருக்க. உன்னை பார்த்து அவர் எழுதியிருக்காரு சில இதெல்லாம். So the person whose copyright is infringed is a person from whom you copied it in your book, and so there is no question of infringement. உனக்கு ரைட்டே கிடையாது, அப்புறம் எதுக்கு காப்பி ரைட் உனக்கு அப்படின்னு சொல்லி அதை அண்டர்லைன் பண்ணி எழுதியிருக்காரு. உனக்கே ரைட்டு கிடையாது, உனக்கு எப்படி உனக்கு ஒரு காப்பி ரைட்டு நான் கொடுக்கறதுன்னு சொல்லி அண்டர்லைன் பண்ணி டிஸ்மிஸ் தி கேஸ். அப்கோர்ஸ் இட் வெண்ட் ஆன் அப்பீல், பட் அப்பீல்ல வந்து 2 பேருமே சமரசம் பேசிட்டு பால்கிவாலா gave 1 rupee. He took 1 rupee from Sampath Iyengar and the case was closed. So that is how the copyright infringement case was handled by ASP Iyer. Brilliant judgment. I think you can, 1951, it was reported in 1951. Sampath Iyengar versus Nani Palkiwala. That is one of the important cases decided by Justice ASP Iyer. Now, another important case, which most of you like to hear, is the Alavandan murder case. The Alavandan murder case என்னன்னா, Alavandan was a trader. அந்த கேஸை பத்தி ஒண்ணுமே பெருசா கிடையாது. Alavandaனே ஒரு சாதாரண ஆளுதான். அவன் கேஸ் எப்படி இவ்வளவு பிரபலமாச்சுன்னா, the gruesome way the murder was carried out by the accused, and the nature, the macabre murder of the person, the victim, the way it was carried out, and secondly, there was a lot of publicity about this case, and எப்படி அந்த மர்டர் பண்ணாங்கிறதா is the most important thing, because it received a lot of publicity in those days. Alavandanangarthu, he was a trader. He retired from military service, and he was running a pen company, Gem and Co. அப்படிங்கிற ஒரு பென் கம்பெனி. அது பக்கத்துல ஒரு, that was not his company, but it was that is where he started his business in selling pens to various people. And mostly his clients were young students and girls whom he used to seduce by offering presents and gifts. பட் நிறைய பேர் வந்து அதை யாருமே ஒன்றும் அது பெருசா சொல்லலை. And many people did not like him because of his character and his attitude towards women and people alike. So this is the background. 29th August 1952, Indo-Ceylon Express train வந்து மானாமதுரை ஸ்டேஷன்ல வந்து உள்ள வருது. It's traveling into the station, and people were getting out. And some people in the third class compartment, they were complaining of a very awful stench, a smell emanating from a box kept under the seat of a in the third class compartment. So the inspector, the station master போறாரு, and they remove the body. They remove the box, a green box. It's a green box, and there was a lot of stench coming out of the green box, and they don't know what it is, and they saw some blood also coming out of that box. So they were all shocked. So they reported to the concerned inspector of police, who came, and the box was taken out. And when they opened the box, they saw a very gruesome sight. ஒரு பாடி வித்தவுட் எனி ஹெட், கை காலை வெட்டி அந்த பாக்ஸ்குள்ளேயே வச்சிருக்காங்க அந்த பாடியோட. இட் வாஸ் அ ஷாக்கிங் திங். ஒரு பேசஞ்சர் ட்ரெயின்ல இந்த மாதிரி ஒரு இன்சிடென்ட் ஆர் சம்திங், இட் வாஸ் வெரி ஷாக்கிங் இன் தோஸ் டேஸ். ஈவன் டுடே இட் இஸ் ஷாக்கிங். இன் தோஸ் டேஸ் இட் வாஸ் unacceptable. So the mysterious container, that is the green box, has had these contents, but nobody knew where the head was. So a postmortem was held, and the body was interred in the burial ground. The grave, they were carefully watched the grave, and they also had a security around the clock where the body was buried. Then the papers reported that the matter and wrote about the contents of the box. It was gaining various publicity, and the question was, where is the head? Yaroda body? Nobody knew whose body it is. Just have a body with two hands and legs severed. So going back to the history, going back to the case. So Alavandara பத்தி நான் பிரீஃபா சொன்னேன், who he is and what is he doing அதெல்லாம் சொல்லும்போது, he was born in 1910. He was a graduate. He was working as a sub-divisional officer in the military department in Avadi. Then he resigned and did business in pens and other stationery items in China Bazaar. இப்போ ஹைகோர்ட் இருக்கு பார்த்தீங்களா, அது பக்கத்துல சைனா பசார்ல அவர் பண்ணிட்டு இருந்தாரு. Then in 1952, he got friendly with a girl called Devaki. He was 23 years old. She was a Hindi tuition எடுக்கிற ஒரு டீச்சர் அவங்க. And she used to visit his shop to buy stationery and other items. அந்த சமயத்துல he befriended her, and he also seduced her. And he told her that he was a bachelor, but she later found out that he was married and he had 2 children, and so she shunned him. So that's where the problem started. Then in 1952, the same year, she married a person called Menon, who was working as a manager in a journal called Freedom. Freedom was a journal. He was working as an advertisement manager. And he met Alavandar and asked him to give some advertisement for his paper. And Alavandar also started said he will give, and he started. But more than what happened during the conversation, இந்த தேவகிய கல்யாணம் பண்ணியதை பத்தி இவர்கிட்ட சொல்றாரு யார் மேனன். And Alavandar started asking some questions which probably Menon did not like, because some personal questions were asked which probably repelled Menon from answering these questions. So Menon and Janaki, I mean, Devaki என்ன பண்றாங்க, they shift their house to ராயபுரம், வீட்டுக்கு எடுக்கிறாங்க in 19 same இது. And they employ a person called Narayanan, ஒரு சின்ன ஒரு 14 வயசு பையன், who was helping these two couples for getting water, because there was a water shortage at that time, for getting water. If now that Alavandar knows that Menon has married Devaki, he started visiting Menon and was asking personal questions about Devaki, which Menon did not like. He felt that he started suspecting the chastity of his wife, and he was asking several probing questions to his wife. யார் ஏன் இந்த கேட்கிறாரு, ஏன் இப்படி பண்றாரு கேட்கும்போது, then there were arguments between the husband and wife. Frequent arguments took place. On the 26th of August 1952, a similar argument took place between these two people. And in the argument, Devaki confesses that she had misconducted herself and that she was seduced by Menon. சொல்லும்போது ரெண்டு பேருக்கும் கோவம் வந்தப்பறம், then they go to Minerva Theatre க்கு படம் பார்க்கறதுக்கு போறாங்க. These are the, but just to ensure that there is a peace between these two people. அந்த படத்தை பார்க்கும்போது திருப்பி this argument comes up. So they abruptly leave the movie and come back to the house. So at that time, Menon tells her in Malayalam, he's a Malayali, he tells her in Malayalam that we have to put an end to Alavandar, because this is creating a problem between us. We have to put an end to it. So on 28th of August 1952, Devaki goes and meets Alavandar in a shop at about 11 a.m. At that time, Menon was purchasing 2 bottles of Vimto, soda மாதிரி இருக்குது, Vimto, from a soda dealer. And at that time, ஒரு கேண்டிடேட் வராரு, எலெக்ஷன்ல நிக்க போறிய, ஒரு முனிசிபல் எலெக்ஷன் நிக்க போறிய ஒரு கேண்டிடேட், மிஸ்டர் விஜயரங்கம்னு வெங்கட்ரங்கம்னு ஒருத்தர் வராரு. அவர் வந்து கேட்கிறாரு, இவரை பார்த்து, ஆலவந்தானை பார்த்து கேட்கிறாரு, எனக்கு இந்த நான் எலெக்ஷன்ல நிக்கிறேன். He was also one of the important witnesses in that case. He was a person who last saw ஆலவந்தான், அதனால அவரோட ஒரு முக்கியமான விட்னஸ். அண்ட் he asked him, எங்க எனக்கு எலெக்ஷன்ல போடுங்க அப்படின்னு சொல்லி சொல்லும்போது, ஆலவந்தான் says yes I will do that ன்னு சொல்றாங்க. அதுக்குள்ள தேவகியும் ஆலவந்தானும் ரொம்ப நெருக்கமா பேசிட்டு இருக்காங்க. So he just says, நான் எலெக்ஷன்ல ஓட்டு போடுறேன், நீங்க கவலைப்படாதீங்க, we will do it ன்னு சொல்லிட்டு போயிடுறாரு. வெங்கட்ரங்கம் கோஸ். அதை தவிர இன்னொருத்தரும் பாக்குறான், இவங்க ரெண்டு பேரும் பேசிட்டு இருக்கிறத இன்னொருத்தரும் பாக்குறான். ஸோ அதனால இவங்க ரெண்டு பேரும் பிரைம் விட்னஸஸ் as far as this incident is concerned. தென் என்ன இருக்குன்னா, தேவகியை போயிடுறாங்க வீட்டுக்கு. போன அப்புறம் ஒரு 12 மணிக்கு போன அப்புறம் ஆலவந்தார் வரார் திருப்பி. ஆலவந்தார் comes to Devaki's house at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Very smartly dressed, he comes in an auto rickshaw. தேவகி அந்த கதவை தட்டுறாரு, தேவகி ஓபன் பண்றாங்க. And he goes into the house. வீட்டுக்குள்ள என்ன நடக்கிறது அப்படிங்கிறது 2 வருஷம் இருக்கு. There are 2 versions what happened inside after Alavandan entered the house. The first version was like this. Then Devaki brings Alavandar into the house. அவர் உட்கார்றாரு சேர்ல, யாருமே கிடையாது, உட்கார்றாரு. Then he makes advances to Devaki. அந்த சமயத்துல Menon was hiding in the kitchen. He comes out and asks Alavandar, how dare he misbehaves with his wife ன்னு சொல்லும்போது, ஆலவந்தார் ரொம்ப ஒரு இதா சொல்றாரு, ஒரு in a very audacious manner replies that உங்க wife எனக்கு எதுக்குமே தெரியும், and I have also moved with her very closely, அப்படின்னு சொல்லி சொல்லும் பொழுது he attacks. யாரு? மேனன் attacks him with a chopper. சாப்பர் வந்து விழுந்த உடனே ஆளவந்தார் கீழே விழறாரு. அண்ட் அப்போ வந்து ஒரு ஒரு டசில் நடக்கிறது ரெண்டு பேருக்கும். தேவகி டேக்ஸ் a knife and gives it to Menon to stab Alavandhan. He was stabbed several times in the chest and a puncture was inflicted in the lungs and Alavandhan dies. Then Menon drags the body to the western portion of the hall. Then he cut off his head and then the arms and the legs. Head வந்து he wraps up in a cloth and the headless torso was put in a green box and the blood began to ooze. தேவைக்கு என்ன பண்றாங்க, அந்த பிளட்டை பிளக் பண்றதுக்கு அவங்களுடைய சாரியை போட்டு கவர் பண்றாங்க அந்த பாக்ஸுக்குள்ள. அது ஃபர்ஸ்ட் வெர்ஷன். செகண்ட் வெர்ஷன், ஆலவந்தார் கேம் டு தேவகிஸ் வாலண்டரிலி அண்ட் ட்ரை டு செட்யூஸ். அது தேவகி அங்க போவே இல்லை. Alavandan himself comes to the house and tries to seduce Devaki. She cried out at that time. Then there was a knock in the door. ஆலவந்தார் போய் ஓபன் பண்றாரு. மேனன் உள்ள வர்றாரு. மேனன் இதை பாக்குறாரு. அவருக்கு கோபம் வருது. தென் அங்க வந்து அடிதடி நடக்கிறது. தென் ஆலவந்தார் வந்து மேனன் அடிக்கிறாரு. ஒரு உடன் பிளாங்க்ல அடிக்கிறாரு. அதை தடுக்கிறதுக்கோசரம் மேனன் வந்து ஒரு வீச்சருவா ஒரு வாள் எடுக்கிற ஒரு கத்தி, அருவாள். அண்ட் he throws it at ஆலவந்தான். ஸோ அது அந்த கத்தி அவர் மேல அடிபட்டு he dies. அதை பார்த்து பயந்த ஆலவந்தார் வந்து அந்த பாடியை வந்து டிசம்பர் பண்றாரு. தலையை பாதி இது பாதெல்லாம் எடுக்கிறாரு. எடுத்துட்டு the body, the torso was put in a green box with the severed arms and legs. The head வந்து is taken and thrown into the குப்பம். That is at the time ராயபுரத்துல எந்த குப்பம் இருந்தது? கோவி குப்பம். அங்க வந்து தூக்கி போடுறது அதுதான் பண்ணியிருக்காரு. That's the facts of the case. But before all this happened, what did happen prior to this? On the fateful day when the incident took place, Menon had gone to meet one Mr. Qadar Moideen and bought 2 knives. 2 கத்தி வாங்கியிருக்காரு, பெரிய கத்தி. Then he told the Narayanan, who is working in his house as a servant, to absent himself for the day and return only in the evening. At 10 a.m., Menon dressed himself and went out. At 5:30, he hired a cycle and bought a green trunk, which he brought home with him. So this is what happened prior to the murder. After the murder, what happened? A day after the headless trunk of a man was found in the train, on 30th August 1952, 29th August was the box found in the Indo-Ceylon train. 30th August 1952, Inspector Ramanatha Iyer, who was in charge of the Raipuram police station, was trying to find out how Alavandhan has disappeared so suddenly and யாரெல்லாம் வந்து அவங்கள பார்த்திருக்காங்க prior to this அப்படின்னு சொல்லி கேட்கறாங்க. இதுக்குள்ள என்ன இருக்குன்னா, ஆலவந்தானும் ஒய்ஃபும் they escape from Madras and then they go to Bombay. அங்க ஆலவந்தான் வந்து is working with the British company. அப்போ அந்த intervening periodல before the investigation started, this is what happened. Then Ramanatha Iyer வந்து என்ன பண்றாரு, he makes a thorough inquiry into the case. எங்க போனாங்க, யாரை பார்த்தாங்க, who was the last people to see ஆலவந்தான், இதெல்லாம் வந்து கேட்டுட்டு இருக்காங்க. Then he goes to the house of the accused. உள்ள போய் then அது வந்து ஒரு வாடகை வீடு. ஹவுஸ் ஓனர் opens and he finds the blood all over the place. வால்ஸ்ல blood இருக்கு, எல்லா இடத்துலயும் blood இருக்கு. Then people around say that Alavandan was in the company of Devaki at about 12 noon on 28th August 1952. Then he started suspecting that there could be a link between the Devaki Menon and Alavandan. So அதனால அது வந்து இன்னும் கொஞ்சம் வந்து ஒரு க்ளோஸா பாக்குறாரு அவர். Then he makes contacts with the auto rickshaw person who dropped Alavandan and then gets information where did he go, எங்க வந்து இறங்கினாரு எல்லாம் கேக்குறாங்க. Then the rickshaw person அவன் விசாரிக்கிறாரு. அவன் சொல்றான் சார் ஒரு ஆளவந்தான் வந்து ஒரு 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 பெரிய மூட்டை எடுத்துட்டு வந்தாரு. ஒரு பம்கின் அந்த ஷேப்ல வந்து ஒரு மூட்டை எடுத்துட்டு வந்தாரு. அந்த மூட்டையை வந்து பூமிக்குப்பம் அந்த ராயபுரம் பீச்ல வந்து அதுல போட்டுட்டாரு. ஸோ ஸோ தே தாட் இட் தட் ஷுட் பி தி ஹெட் அப்படின்னு அவர் மனசுல நினைச்சுக்கிட்டார் ராம்நாத் ஐயர். அண்ட் தென் தே சர்ச் தி பேக் வாட்டர்ஸ் அண்ட் அந்த ஷோர் அடிச்சுட்டு வரும்போது அந்த ஹெட்டும் வருது, அந்த ஷோருக்கு வருது அந்த ஹெட். Then they recover the head and they find out the features of that head and they were able to identify that it is must be the head of Alavandan அப்படிங்கறத ஐடென்டிஃபை பண்ணாங்க. Now the head goes for postmortem. Body அப்ப போச்சு, head போகுது. Then what happened was they found out where Alavandan had gone and they wanted to trace எங்க போனாங்க எப்படி பண்ணாங்கன்னு பார்த்த உடனே they went to the Egmore station, railway station. அப்போ அங்க போய் இன்வெஸ்டிகேஷன் போட்டு விசாரிச்சாங்க. இந்த மாதிரி அப்போ யாரோ ஒருத்தர் வந்தாருங்க, அவரு வந்து ஒரு குட்டி எடுத்துட்டு வந்தாரு. இந்த போர்ட்டர்ஸ் எல்லாம் வந்து குட்டி எடுத்துட்டு வரேன்னு சொல்லும் போது அவர் வேண்டாம் நானே எடுத்துட்டு போறேன்னு சொல்லி அவரே எடுத்துட்டு போய் தேர்ட் கிளாஸ் கம்பார்ட்மெண்ட்ல அந்த குட்டியை வச்சுட்டு நீ வெண்ட் ஆஃப் அப்படின்னு சொல்லி கெட்ஸ் இன்ஃபர்மேஷன். Then what happened was then they found out that Menon and his wife had vacated the house. They've removed all the belongings and they have gone to Devaki's father's house. So they traced them to the father's house. And then they found out that from there they have gone to Bombay, to Bangalore by train. And from Bangalore they flew to Bombay by air at that time. Then they made enquiries in Bombay and found out where the Menons are residing. And they apprehended Menon in Bombay and they found a watch and a fountain pen in his possession which belonged to Alavandan. So that is point number, the first point. On 13th September, Menon was brought to Madras from Bombay and he was asked to identify all the clothes in the house and they found the bloodshed clothes of Alavandan under a boulder. ஒரு கல்லு வெளியில வச்சிருந்தாங்க, அதை ட்ரேஸ் பண்ணி எடுக்கிறாங்க. Then they questioned Menon on that whether it was Alavandan or whether it was யாருன்னு கேட்டு the samples எல்லாம் எடுத்துட்டு போய் they give it for examination and they found it was the blood of Alavandan. So Menon பொறுத்த மட்டும் is totally in. There is no doubt on that. இந்த கேஸை ப்ராசிக்யூட் பண்ணது எங்க மை அஸ்வைல் பாஸ் மிஸ்டர் கோவிந்த் சுவாமிநாதன். அவர் தான் ப்ராசிக்யூஷன் டீமை லீட் பண்ணி and it was one of the finest prosecution and the arguments went on for several days. The whole court was packed. A very famous case. Now we come to Devaki. Devaki was also arrested and because she was not well, she was admitted in the hospital. And she was discharged on 22nd September 1952. Menon made a confession that he was responsible for the murder, but Devaki refused. She said, I am not connected with this only. She refused. So statements were wrong. Then later, after a further interrogation by the concerned police, Devaki confessed of abetting to that murder and also told the court that how the incident took place. Then the two witnesses, Venkat Rangam, who had seen Alamandar leaving with Devaki, and also another who saw Alamandar entering Menon's house. The two witnesses, they were honored and they also gave their statements regarding the timing of the incident, how it took place. எல்லாம் சொல்றாங்க. So the differences in the confession statements caused a little confusion in the minds of the court whether these people could have been involved directly in the case of Alamanda. But then there was damning evidence and the material evidence also, where the fingerprints were taken of Menon and Devaki, and it was clear that Menon was charge sheeted for murder and Devaki for abandonment to the murder. So these are the two important, and also they were charged for causing disappearance of evidence of the murder. So இந்த கேஸ் இப்போ பஞ்சாப் கேசர் நடக்கும் பொழுது the court was thronged. அதாவது crowd வந்து phenomenal crowd, கண்ட்ரோல் பண்ண முடியாத crowd because they are allowed to. But the defense lawyer, Mr. B.T. Sundararajan, who defended the accused, went on the theory that it was a self-defense, there was no provocation or there was no mens rea in this murder. And it was done out of grave provocation and self-defense in Choli. So it is a homicide and not murder in Choli, our argument. But in those days, till 1955, the jury system was there in India. After 1955, the jury was abolished. So, but the jury found both the Menons guilty under section 201 and 304(1) of the IPC, but not under 302 of the IPC. So, accepting the verdict of the jury, ASPAR sentenced P.P. Menon for rigorous imprisonment of 7 years and Devaki for abetment to murder for 3 years. So, that is how the conviction came to be made, and both were arrested and they were lodged in central prison at that time. So this is one of the important cases handled by ASP Iyer on the Alavandar murder case. See, more than the murder, which is also a routine murder case now, why it had developed such a popularity, I mean, it was so famous, was only because the way in which the murder took place and the gruesomeness of the murder, publicity given to that case, and also the interesting facts surrounding that case. So this is how the Alamdan murder case was conducted, and it was that is how ASPA with his ingenuity convicted the accused of murder. I mean, for homicide and not murder. So these are the two cases which I thought was relevant to the present day context. And our phenomenal sense of humor also is very evident during the case proceedings, which made the court very lively. See, any court, unless there is liveliness in the case or by the ingenuity of the advocates who are handling the case, you will find it very boring. So ASPR ஒரு குவாலிட்டி என்னன்னா, எப்பேற்பட்ட கேஸா இருந்தாலும் you will see a lot of humor, lot of energy, and a lot of wit in conducting these cases, which made the case move very pleasantly and smoothly rather than making it very cumbersome. So those are the two cases of ASP Iyer. And a couple of anecdotes on ASP Iyer before I close. அவர் வந்து இந்த காஃபி பவுடர் பத்தி சொன்ன பாத்தீங்களா, அந்த சிக்கரி, அது ஒரு இன்சிடென்ட். ரெண்டாவது வந்து என்னன்னா, ஏஎஸ்பி ஐயர் இஸ் an all-rounder. அதாவது அவர் வந்து இஸ் நாட் ஒன்லி a judge but also a great author. அவர் எழுதின சில புக்ஸ் நான் just going to make a note of that. It should probably be added in, I mean, would be an addition to what is already said. ASP Iyer died in 1963 because of cerebral thrombosis. He died of that. And some of his other contributions was he wrote a book called The Three Men of Destiny. That was also on the question of writing about Chanakya and how Chanakya was the brain behind the Chandragupta Empire. Then, in his book Sri Krishna, the Darling of Humanity, Justice A.S.P. Iyer says Alexander the Great once asked a Brahmin in the 4th century BC, how can we know a man to be God? அப்படிங்கிறத கேட்கறான் அவன் கேள்வி. அதுக்கு அவர் என்ன சொல்றாருன்னா, the scholar replied, when he does what no man can ever do, he is treated as God அப்படிங்கிறார். So that is how Shakespeare's contribution to literature also plays a very great role. Then in 1942, he wrote a book called Vasa, who is a great poet and is one of the earliest and the most celebrated Indian playwrights in Sanskrit, predating Kalidas. So Bhasha was one of the Vasa, Bhasa, is one of the most important great poets. Avarapati Ayirgar ASPAyer. His contribution to literary society has been phenomenal. So, in short, you see a man who has contributed to every sphere of cultural activity, legal activity, social activity. He was a great speaker also. And at the age of, I think, 70, 64, I think he died in 1963. So, thus we come to the conclusion of this topic on the Doyens of the bar and bench, with particular emphasis on Justice ASP Iyer.